Now let's look at measuring productivity when your company provides a service. Now if you think back to our level 0, we were looking at the difference between goods and services. And we said the challenge with services is that they don't have a uniform input. For example, if we're talking about a hair salon, then everyone doesn't show up with the same kind of hair, the same length of hair. So the inputs are not the same. The other challenge with services are the outputs are not the same. That is, everyone doesn't go into the hair salon to get the exact same haircut. Some go in and get their hair colored, some have short hair, some have long. And so it's difficult to measure productivity when the final product is not the same. So services are a challenge when it comes to measuring productivity because we have different inputs and different outputs. And this is quite a challenge that faces a lot of companies, especially healthcare. In the healthcare industry, because we get a lot of government funding for their operations, there's a real demand that they be more efficient, that they increase their productivity, that they see more patients and provide more care. So if you're managing in healthcare, you have to make a decision. How do I increase the productivity at my hospital or clinic? So let's look at some of the challenges that occur with that. So let's suppose that you are managing the ER, the emergency room, and someone has been admitted for gallstones. Well, there are two different approaches you could take to treating someone with gallstones. Option number 1, laparoscopic surgery. That's 3 small incisions in your abdominal. That's 2 hours of anesthetic and 2 days recovering in the hospital. Option number 2, an open cholecystectomy. This is when the abdominal is cut open, still 2 hours of anesthesia, but now because of that large cut in your abdomen, then you are in the hospital 6 days recovering. So which one do you do? Well, if you're measuring productivity in terms of more people being seen at the hospital, then as an administrator you would say, well, I want everyone to have laparoscopic surgery because that means you're only in the hospital for 2 days, you're in, you're out, and that bed is now available for someone else. So we can get more people through, more people treated. But is that necessarily what's in the best interest of your patient? It could be that because of complications your patients have had in the past, laparoscopic surgery is not the best option. It could be that because of conditions that they have, it's better to do an open cholecystectomy where there's a full abdominal cut. So you look at how do you become more productive, and we have to be careful with services because if we're looking at increasing profit and lowering costs, often we get to a point where we say we should be providing the service that is the fastest. And this can create issues for our company. And if we're in the healthcare industry, it's costly if there are medical complications from putting a patient under laparoscopic surgery when that's not appropriate for them. So you have to consider about the cost of follow-up, of complications, and of customer satisfaction. So let's look at another example. All right, you're managing a hospital and you're looking at, okay, well, how do I structure my fee, how I pay the doctors at the hospital, okay? So we have someone come in, 55 years old, hypertension, okay? We can give them an ECG, put in a stent, we can release them in 2 days. All right, success, right? In that case, in, out, on to the next patient. But how are our doctors being paid? How is the hospital making revenue? So the challenge with some of the pay structure that we have currently in Alberta is, does it encourage you to be more productive? In fact, the more productive you are at a hospital right now, the less you get paid because, for example, you're getting, the hospital makes revenue it gets paid per day that there's someone in the bed using that. So it's actually, if the hospital can fill that bed with the same person for 10 days, they're going to make more money than if that person is in the bed for 2 days. So at that point, there's actually an incentive to be less productive. Well, what about the doctors? If we have doctors that are working on fee-for-service, then they get paid per person they see. So what does that do for incentives? It means that a doctor then is encouraged to spend less time with each patient because they get paid more for every patient they visit and spend time with. We could change that, and we could have doctors be paid for the number of hours they work instead of the number of patients, in which case the incentive structure changes, and then the doctor has an incentive now to spend more time with a single patient, which is then good for the patient, but then that means that other patients may not have a doctor to see. So there's a bit of a balancing act in terms of how do you reward productivity, and does your fee schedule how you pay your employees and how you make your money, your revenue, does that match? So when you're looking at productivity as a service, we really have to look at the trade-off between productivity, so helping more people, and customer satisfaction, because typically customer satisfaction comes from more quality time. Whether it's a doctor or in the hospital spending more time with you to help you in your recovery, or whether that's customer service in terms of you're going in to get a mortgage at the bank. Do we have you in and out in 5 seconds, or do we sit down with you and explain to you the whole process and what to expect, and so that level of customer service? Well, whether you focus on productivity or customer service as part of your company is going to depend on a couple things. Okay, so when do you focus on productivity over customer service? Well, before we get into that, let's look at a scenario. So Comcast, a US cable company, they increased their productivity and their customer satisfaction went down. UPS and FedEx, they increased their productivity and their customer satisfaction went up. So it really comes down to what is the value to the customer? What is the customer getting out of it? And when we look at UPS and FedEx, it used to be that if you wanted to track your package, you would need to make a phone call to UPS, and that would cost about $2.40 for someone on the phone to help you track it. Now, when we want to track a package, we just go online and type in a number, and that cost to the business is only 4 cents. So by switching to the system where they can track your packages electronically and you can log in to check it yourself, their costs have gone down, their productivity has gone up, and their customer satisfaction has gone up. So in that case, the method for increasing the productivity added value to the customer, and the two moved together. With Comcast, when they increased their productivity, so now they're expanding in terms of increasing the customer base, that meant there was now less time to provide service to each customer, so you had to wait longer on the phone if you had a problem, your cable wasn't working. You had to wait longer to have someone come to your house if it wasn't working to get it fixed. And so there's the trade-off between productivity and customer satisfaction. Productivity went up, customer satisfaction went down. If the service you provide and the changes you want to make to your process or technology would create this trade-off between productivity and customer satisfaction, there are some things to consider when deciding which one to focus on, customer satisfaction or productivity. So you should focus on productivity if you have a highly concentrated market. So if you have very few competitors, then your increase in productivity, even though it makes customer service or satisfaction decline, your customers don't have a lot of other choices. So because they don't have a lot of other choices, even if they're less satisfied, they're not likely to switch. And so you can pursue productivity at the expense of your customer satisfaction without it impacting the bottom line. You can also pursue an increase in productivity at the expense of customer satisfaction if in your industry you pay high wages. The idea here is that we would find more productive ways to provide our service, and that would mean that we would need less workers. So that increase in productivity would mean we would get more out of each worker, and that decline in customer satisfaction, so the lost revenue from losing some customers, would be offset by the fact that our costs would fall because we're able to spread that high wage across more units, or we don't need as many workers to make as much. So if you have high wages, you can increase productivity at the expense of customer service. The third time in which you would pursue productivity, even though it would decline customer service, is if you have an international competitor that's a low-cost competitor. So if your competition is undercutting you with much lower costs, then in order to compete, you're going to have to lower your costs as well, which means you're going to have to increase your productivity, increase the outputs, decrease the inputs, get more bang for your buck, so that you can compete at that level. Otherwise, even if the customers are happy with you, they're going to switch to the lower cost anyway. Now, when might you focus on customer satisfaction over productivity? Well, if you are in an industry with high profit margins. So if there's a big difference between the cost to make it and the price you sell it for, you have a big profit margin, then you don't need to be as productive. Cutting costs isn't as big of a deal. Increasing outputs and decreasing inputs isn't as big of a concern because you're making more per unit. Which means customer satisfaction is very important because every unit you sell gives you money, and you don't want to lose a single item. So if we think about, for example, if you're a high-end retailer, let's say that you sell very expensive clothing. You have high profit margins. It's very important to you then that your customers stay happy because you have this smaller customer base that's buying your product and you're making more from each customer, in which case you don't want to lose them. So you should focus on customer satisfaction rather than finding ways to increase your outputs and decrease your inputs. If you are competing based on perceived quality, so if the key purchasing criteria of your customer base is quality, then you need to focus on customer satisfaction rather than productivity. When we talk about productivity focus, we're decreasing our inputs, finding cheaper ways to do things, and that can have a negative impact on quality. So if people are buying from you for high quality items, then your focus needs to be on customer satisfaction rather than on productivity. Also, if that key purchasing criteria is customer satisfaction, then you need to focus on customer satisfaction. So if it's really down to people are coming to you because of that level of service, that's your differentiation from the competitors, is that unique level of service and that level of satisfaction, then you can't give that up for an increase in productivity. Otherwise, you're no longer different from the competition. So if people come to you solely for that, then that has to be a priority over increasing outputs and decreasing inputs. Now, let's look at an example where a company made a decision to increase productivity, but then it turned out to be the wrong decision. So let's look at Walmart. Walmart added self-serve checkout lines, and other companies have done the same. In fact, if we look at airlines, Alaska Airlines was one of the first in the world to add the self-serve check-in for flying. And for Alaska Airlines, it worked fantastic. They were able to decrease the amount of the workforce, so decrease the inputs, and that meant more productivity, more output per unit, per input. But when Walmart did it, when Walmart added their self-serve checkouts, it peaked in about 2007. 22% of Walmarts had self-serve checkout. Since then, the number of self-serve checkouts at Walmart has actually fallen back down. So their emphasis on productivity didn't work out well for them. There were issues such as people stealing products, so it was harder to monitor. People felt confused and frustrated with trying to check out items. You have to look at who your customers are, the demographic. Are these people who can use that new technology? With Alaska Airlines, the people who flew that airline had no problem with the change in technology and process. For Walmart, it was a different story. People using those checkouts were frustrated, they couldn't get their barcodes to scan, and it really hurt Walmart's customer satisfaction. And so what we see now is that there's actually been a decline in self-serve checkouts at Walmart as they shift back to a focus on customer satisfaction over productivity.